All right, ladies and gentlemen, so now that we've covered the various bases by which Kentucky runs itself constitutionally, and now that you've looked at the preamble of the U.S. Constitution and the preamble of the state constitution, now we're going to turn our attention to how Kentucky's government is set up. One of the things that you may have noted when doing that comparison between the state preamble and the national preamble is the national preamble is a lot more expansive than our state preamble. But if you start looking at some other vestiges of our Constitution and other characteristics of it, you'll find that we're a little more detailed than the national government. However, when you look at the general governing structure of the state and the branches of government that we have, you'll notice as I go through these things that there are a lot of similarities maybe between Kentucky and the national government, something you'll reflect on in the activity that will follow these notes as the last part of the module for this week. So let's start talking about the first branch of Kentucky's government, the legislative branch. The legislative branch is called the General Assembly, and you'll hear this referred to from time to time when the General Assembly is called to meet during a calendar year by the media. Our legislative branch in Kentucky is bicameral, which means we have two separate houses that are elected to serve in various times. We have a House of Representatives for the state that has 100 members. These members are elected in a multitude of districts across the state. We have 100 districts, 100 members represent those. And then we have a state senate that has 38 members. So collectively, the legislative branch encompasses 138 different voices, all of whom represent the different geographic regions of the state. Now, in order for a bill to be passed, both the House and the Senate have to approve of it. If the House approves something and the Senate rejects it, or the Senate passes something and the House rejects it, then the bill dies. But the General Assembly has a very short time in which to meet. It does meet every year. It used to be that in Kentucky, our General Assembly met once every 2 years. You may have remembered me saying that in our previous notes. But the General Assembly meets once a year, and it meets on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in January. So once that first Monday in January hits, the legislature meets on the first Tuesday of the calendar. And some of the things that the legislature has to do is to get things passed in a quick amount of time. In odd numbered years, the General Assembly will meet for 30 days, and it only has 30 days on the calendar to meet. In even-numbered years, the General Assembly will meet for 60 days, okay, and it can meet for that term of the calendar year. But keep in mind that the biggest thing for the General Assembly is that it has to work efficiently, because once these days pass, then no more legislative activity can take place. There are times when the governor can summon a special session after this term is up, but that has to be on a very defined level of issues, and the legislature can't go beyond those. So just understand that Kentucky, we have a very limited amount of time for our state legislative bodies to meet, because in odd numbered years, the meetings must be done by March, and in even numbered years, everything has to be wrapped up by April. The major power that the legislative branch enjoys is the power to pass laws and spending bills. So the big powers that the legislature enjoys is that they have to pass laws that go onto the books. The governor does not have the ability to pass a law. And when it comes to the spending of state money, the legislative branch has to allocate that for various programs. In fact, the biggest responsibility of the legislature is to spend the taxpayers' dollars in Kentucky, but they have to have a balanced budget. You know, Kentucky, we do not have the ability to spend money we do not have. Okay, so the legislature is in charge of that. And if the governor doesn't agree with a bill and vetoes it, says, I don't agree with the bill, I'm going to throw it out, the legislature can override the governor's veto with a majority in each chamber. So if a majority in the House choose to overcome the veto and a majority in the Senate choose to do that, then the bill becomes law, even though the governor wanted to discard it. So there are parts of the checks and balances framework that matter. So let's talk about the executive branch. That's a picture of our current governor, Andy Beshear. His father, Steve Beshear, was governor prior to him taking office. The governor in Kentucky, you have to be at least 30 years old to run for governor, and you have to be a resident of the state for 6 years. But Kentucky's governor is elected to a 4-year term. Okay? So the governor serves 4 years. They're elected in an odd-numbered year election. So our previous governor's election took place in 2019. It was decided by 5,000 votes, which wasn't much when you looked at record voter turnout that particular year. But the governor can serve 2 consecutive terms. It used to be that Kentucky's governors could only serve 1 term and no consecutive terms were allowed. However, that was changed in 1992, as we talked about. So they can serve more than 1 term, but no more than 2 consecutive terms in office. The governor has a lot of duties in Kentucky, and we're going to break some more of these down maybe when we return in person. But the governor has duties in Kentucky to preside over various state ceremonies. They're also a legislative leader, so a lot of times the legislature will look to the governor's address at the beginning of the general session as a way to kind of see what the priorities of the state should be. They also function as party leaders. So currently Andy Beshear is a Democrat, so by virtue of that, he is the de facto Democratic leader of the state. A lot of state Democrats will look to Andy Beshear for guidance or election strategy and things like that as new elections approach. And the big responsibility of the governor is to manage the state, keep the state secure. So if there's a natural disaster, the governor should try to get as much federal assistance as possible to help those people. In the midst of COVID right now, one of Governor Beshear's major decisions is to try to figure out how should businesses operate, how should schools operate, what's the best way to combat this virus. And that's kind of how he has presided over the state in that function. The major powers that are given to a governor in the state is to issue executive orders, which kind of have the force of law, although those can be challenged in court, and Governor Beshear has used a lot of those in our handling of COVID-19. He also has the ability to veto laws, and so the governor has the ability, if the General Assembly passes a bill that they do not like, they can veto it. However, a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate can override a governor's veto, so some of that power is limited. And if there are any judicial vacancies before an election can be held in the Commonwealth, the governor has the ability to appoint a new justice. And the governor also has some other appointment powers on the State Board of Education and things like this. So appointment powers are big for the current governor, as well as their ability to veto laws. But our governor is not as maybe powerful as, say, the President of the United States when handling a lot of state issues. The legislature still possesses a lot of power. Finally, let's talk about the judicial branch. So what can the judicial branch do in the state? Well, Kentucky has a variety of different courts, and I'll show you a diagram at the end of these notes to kind of go through this. And if you have me for law and justice, you've heard some of this already. But Kentucky, we have trial courts, and trial courts are where people are arraigned for a variety of offenses. They can be felonies, they can be misdemeanors, they can be capital crimes, they can be crimes of property, civil lawsuits, whatever. So at the trial court, this is where you're going to see juries that form an opinion about guilt or innocence, or whether people are liable or not liable for certain offenses. And then people that lose at the trial court level, if there's an error of law, can appeal to the Court of Appeals that is segmented around the different parts of Kentucky. And the Court of Appeals, if people lose there, they can then appeal to the state Supreme Court. Now remember that our state Supreme Court has 7 justices. They serve 8-year terms, and they are elected. So on the federal level, judges serve for life. In Kentucky, though, they're elected to a variety of terms. And based on what kind of judge you are in Kentucky, your term of office is different. Like the state Supreme Court justices are there for 8 years. But if you're a district court judge at the various trial courts, you may only serve for 4 years, and then you have to run for re-election. So these things are out there, and one of the controversies is, should the voters have a choice about our justices? Because one of the issues that runs, as part of Kentucky's judicial process is, do sometimes judges issue harsher sentences because they want to appear tough on crime before an election? So those things are arguments against having elections for judges, but the other side is that it makes judges accountable to the people for their decisions. The major power of judges in Kentucky is the power of judicial review, the power to toss laws out as being unconstitutional to the Kentucky Constitution. Now, keep in mind that the state Supreme Court can rule one way on an issue, but they can be overridden by the U.S. Supreme Court if someone appeals to that level. But the major power that people have in the state is the power of judicial review in the courts, because as the courts interpret laws, if they find that the laws are unconstitutional, then they get tossed out. And this affected teacher pensions, because under the previous governor, they took a bill that was supposed to be used for sewage treatment or something, recrafted it into a pension reform bill, and it passed. And the judiciary ruled that you couldn't do that in the legislature, take a bill that was meant for one purpose, strip everything out of that bill, strong arm in a different type of bill, and make it be heard. So judges can overrule parts of the General Assembly, and the only way to combat a judicial decision is by passing a state constitutional amendment. So if you just kind of want to see the Kentucky judicial system there, you can see that, cases that move through district courts can then be moved to circuit courts, and then based on decisions there can either be routed to the Court of Appeals or directly to the state Supreme Court. Usually cases that are routed directly to the state Supreme Court can be issues revolving around the death penalty, life imprisonment, things of this sort. And family court decisions work their way through the Court of Appeals. And again, anything at the Court of Appeals can then be sent to the Kentucky Supreme Court. So there's a lot of these issues that go through the judiciary, and they go through this flow chart at different times. But just understand that there are different levels of the courts in Kentucky, and that way people are getting multiple opportunities to have their cases heard and to have their appeals heard. So going through these, you may have seen some similarities because the U.S. Constitution also has 3 different branches of government. So as a closing exercise, what I want you to complete is an exercise called Who Has the Power in Kentucky? And for this, you'll be identifying which branch has the power to do certain things. And then at the end of the day, whose authority is being checked by that. So for example, the legislature can pass a law, which means that the governor doesn't have the ability alone to pass a law. The legislature gets to do that. The governor does not get to do that. And this is a way for you to see some checks and balances in Kentucky's Constitution, but also have a check on who really does have the power to do these things in the state. So I hope that everyone has a great week. Doing that final activity will wrap up the module, and you will want to have all the steps of the module completed for class by Friday at 3:15. I hope that everyone has a great week, and I will see you next week.